If you believe that creatures from the Cretaceous period no longer walk the earth, you might be mistaken. In this episode, we venture into one of the most mysterious and least explored places on the planet, the Congo rainforest. A dense, ancient expanse of life that stretches across Central Africa, this jungle covers more than 500,000 square miles, making it second in size only to the Amazon. But size alone is what makes this place so haunting. It's what may be hiding within. The Congo Basin is not just a sea of green. It is a labyrinth of swamps, rivers, caves, and shadowed clearings, places that even satellites struggle to fully map. In fact, according to the Wildlife Conservation Society, only around 10% of the forest has ever been scientifically studied. That leaves a staggering 90% untouched by modern research. Just think about that. Entire ecosystems, perhaps entire species, could exist right now without us ever knowing, and perhaps they do. Local tribes who have lived in this region for thousands of years speak of creatures that defy everything science has taught us. Not spirits, not myths, but physical beasts, some as large as elephants, others more ancient than time. So why hasn't science confirmed their existence? The answer lies in the terrain itself. Thick walls of vines, mud-slicked trails, hidden sinkholes. Add to that the lack of roads, communication, and infrastructure, and any expedition becomes a gamble. Even seasoned researchers often turn back. Those who push deeper face not just the wild, but political instability, armed groups, and the ever-present risk of disease and injury. And yet the stories persist. From generation to generation, across countless villages and tribal groups, people recount the same tales. Enormous footprints appeared overnight, giant shadows moving through the mist. Growls in the darkness that don't belong to any known animal. But these aren't just tales whispered around fires. In recent years, conservationists and scientists have returned to the Congo, this time with satellite imaging, drones, and motion sensor cameras. And what they've found isn't always easy to explain, because this isn't just a rainforest. It's a vault of secrets millions of years old. So buckle up, as we step beyond the boundaries of what we know into a world where nature still holds the upper hand, and where something ancient might still be watching from the shadows. Deep within the tangled wetlands of the Congo Basin, there are whispers of a creature that should not exist. They call it Mokele-Mbembe, a name that means the one who stops the flow of rivers in the Lingala language. To the outside world, it sounds like a myth, but to the people who live along the banks of Lake Tele and the dense river systems nearby, it is a memory passed down like family history. They speak of it not as legend, but as reality. Mokele-Mbembe is said to be massive, roughly the size of an African elephant, with a long serpentine neck, a bulky, rounded torso, and a powerful tail that cuts through the swamp like a blade. Its skin is smooth, gray-brown, and leathery. Its legs, thick and column-like, move with slow, deliberate force, and its head, small and compact, sits at the end of its snake-like neck, glancing cautiously above the waterline. But what's most shocking isn't the description. It's the resemblance to something we've only seen in textbooks and museums, a sauropod dinosaur. Accounts of Mokele-Mbembe date back over 200 years. From pygmy hunters to European missionaries, the stories remain startlingly consistent. One tale tells of missionaries showing a picture book of animals to local villagers, animals from around the world. But when they reached the page depicting a sauropod, the villagers pointed and said without hesitation, "That is the creature that lives in our forest." They had never seen a dinosaur book before, never been exposed to paleontology, and yet they recognized something that should have been extinct for over 65 million years. Could that be a coincidence? Some researchers, like biologist Roy Mackal from the University of Chicago, didn't think so. In the 1980s, Mackal led expeditions into the Congo's swamps, searching for answers. What he found were massive, three-toed footprints, some measuring nearly a meter across, deep in the mud banks where the creature was said to roam. Locals described Mokele-Mbembe as herbivorous, feeding on soft river plants and fruit. But they warned, disturb it, and it can become dangerously aggressive. In one chilling story, a group of fishermen who tried to trap it with nets never returned. Their boats were found days later, shattered and empty. Skeptics argue that these sightings are misidentifications, perhaps of large hippos or monitor lizards, but those who have hunted and lived in this land for generations reject such claims. They know the difference. So the question remains, could Mokele-Mbembe be a surviving relic of Earth's ancient past? If any place on Earth could hide a living dinosaur, that would be here. If the idea of a dinosaur hiding in a swamp sounds terrifying, then imagine walking through a forest trail and realizing the web you're caught in wasn't meant for insects. Among the Baka people, an indigenous group that has lived along the edges of the Congo rainforest for generations, there exists a name spoken in fear and reverence, J'ba Fofi. It means giant spider. But this is no myth spun to scare children. According to Baka elders, J'ba Fofi is a real, ground-dwelling arachnid that dwells in the deepest, darkest parts of the jungle, not in the trees, not in caves, but right beneath your feet, in the damp soil where the roots of ancient trees decay and where light almost never touches the earth. Eyewitnesses describe a monstrous creature. A body as wide as a car tire, legs stretching over 5 feet, a dark brown exoskeleton tinged with violet, and a swollen abdomen that glistens in the shadows. Its movements are slow, deliberate, but deadly. Its webs don't stretch overhead like the ones we know. Instead, J'ba Fofi lays its traps across narrow animal paths, threading silk just inches off the ground, perfect for snaring small mammals or the ankles of humans. One of the earliest accounts came from a British missionary near Lake Nyasa in the late 19th century. He described stumbling into a colossal web stretched between 2 trees, followed by the emergence of a spider so large it moved like a predator, not an insect. With one bite, it downed a member of his party. The missionary escaped, but the nightmare followed him for the rest of his life. Years later, researcher William J. Gibbons traveled to the Congo in pursuit of Mokele-Mbembe. But when he spoke to local tribes, they pointed him not toward the dinosaur, but toward something far worse. They called it the Great Spider, a creature that made even the elders fall silent. Some claimed it builds leaf nests on the forest floor, structures eerily similar in shape to the huts of the Baka themselves. Could such a creature really exist? Biologically speaking, modern spiders are limited in size by the way they breathe. Their primitive tracheal system and exoskeletons make it hard for them to grow beyond a certain point. But millions of years ago, when the Earth had higher oxygen levels and warmer temperatures, creatures like the Meganura, a dragonfly with a wingspan of 2 feet, once filled the skies. Under those same conditions, a spider like J'ba Fofi might not just be possible, it might be inevitable. And here, in the uncharted wilderness of the Congo, where nature follows rules of its own, who's to say that something ancient hasn't been quietly waiting, hidden beneath the moss, for someone to make the wrong step? In the tangled swamp forests of Central Africa, there is a creature so fear-driven the elephants keep their distance. Its name is Mokele-Mbembe, which translates to the one who kills elephants. And unlike legends clouded in symbolism or myth, this beast is spoken of in clear, physical terms, by people who have seen it, tracked it, and feared it for generations. Among the tribes living near the Likwala swamps, Mokele-Mbembe is not a ghost or spirit. It is a real animal, a dangerous force of nature. Hunters who know the jungle better than any scientist describe a solitary, territorial creature, semi-aquatic, massively built, and able to attack without warning. Its most chilling feature, a single horn protruding from the center of its forehead. Its thick, armored skin is said to repel spears and bullets. Its body moves low and heavy, with strength enough to knock down trees and crush large prey. What startles outsiders the most is how locals, completely unfamiliar with modern paleontology, consistently describe a creature nearly identical to a triceratops. Missionaries once brought picture books of African wildlife to the region. When they showed a page with the triceratops, expecting confusion, the villagers instead pointed and said, "That is Tauka." They had no way of knowing what a dinosaur was, no exposure to textbooks, no museums, no internet, and yet they recognized it instantly. Some believe this is a coincidence, others a case of mistaken identity. But many researchers, especially cryptozoologists, see it as something more. In the 1930s, a tale spread of a group of Congolese hunters who reportedly killed one of these beasts. One man kept its horn as a trophy, refusing to show it to outsiders for fear that foreign governments or collectors would take it away. To this day, the artifact has never surfaced, but the story refuses to fade. Villages in the region still avoid certain rivers and forested areas, not out of superstition, but because they believe those places belong to Tauka. As one elder put it, "Where there are no elephants, there is Tauka." The elephants know, they stay away. Could this creature be a surviving ceratopsian dinosaur, or is it an undiscovered species that somehow evolved in complete isolation? In a land where only 10% has ever been explored, where swamps swallow footprints and the canopy blocks satellites, perhaps the truth isn't lost, it's just waiting beneath the water watching. In May of 1959, a military helicopter soared above the dense canopy of the Congo rainforest. On board were three men, a pilot, a photographer, and Colonel Remy van Leerd, a seasoned Belgian officer. What they saw that day was not supposed to exist. As they flew low over the jungle, something moved below, something long, winding, and disturbingly large. It wasn't a fallen tree. It was alive, slithering like a river through the undergrowth. Colonel Van Leerd ordered the helicopter to descend, and there, cutting through the foliage, was a serpent, an estimated 50 feet long, with a body as thick as a utility pole and a head that rose 10 feet above the ground. The team snapped photographs, but as they realized how close they were, possibly within striking range, they pulled away. The photo taken that day would become one of the most hotly debated images in the history of cryptozoology. To some, it shows a surviving titanoboa. To others, it's just a clever illusion. But the story doesn't end there. Titanoboa cerrejonensis was a real species, a monstrous snake that lived during the Paleocene epoch, around 60 million years ago. It could grow up to 50 feet in length and weigh over 2,000 pounds, making it the largest snake ever recorded on Earth. It thrived in hot, humid, swampy environments, exactly the kind of conditions still found in the Congo today. And the people who live there. They know this snake. Different tribes have different names for it. Some call it the forest river, others refer to it as the canoe eater, but all share the same terrifying image. A serpent so large it can swallow an antelope, or a boat with a man inside, whole. Researchers who have studied the Van Leerd photo agree on one thing: if the image is genuine, it shows a creature science cannot yet explain. Some suggest it's a mutation of a known African python. Others believe it's a direct descendant of Titanoboa that somehow survived extinction, hidden in the unexplored recesses of the forest. But whether it's prehistoric, evolved, or entirely unknown, one thing is clear: in the Congo, the jungle breathes, and sometimes it slithers. Beneath the still, murky waters of the Congo's deepest river, something ancient may still be waiting. Its name is Mahamba, a word spoken with caution by river tribes, not in legend, but in warning. Mahamba is often described as a crocodile, but only at first glance, because no known crocodile matches its terrifying scale. According to local accounts, Mahamba stretches up to 50 feet in length, longer than a city bus, with limbs so powerful it can launch itself from water to land in a single motion, faster than any man can run. It doesn't hunt often, it doesn't need to. When it does, it swallows prey whole, wooden canoes, livestock, even people, leaving no trace behind. Unlike most mythical beasts, Mahamba has an eerie parallel in the fossil record. A real prehistoric predator known as Deinosuchus. Deinosuchus lived during the late Cretaceous period and reached lengths of 35 to 40 feet. With a bite force exceeding 23,000 pounds per square inch, it could crush the bones of dinosaurs. It was an ambush predator, silent, submerged, deadly, and the Congo might be its last stronghold. In 1930, one of the final known sightings of Mahamba was documented. Since then, the creature has slipped back into shadow. No modern photographs, no scientific confirmation, but to the people who live near its waters, Mahamba never left. They tell stories of glowing eyes in the night, of sudden whirlpools appearing without wind, of entire stretches of river where even the bravest fishermen refused to paddle. A Baka elder once told a visiting researcher, "We do not need to see Mahamba to know it is there. It is the silence in the water that tells us." In a world filled with satellites, sonar, and scientific certainty, perhaps the greatest proof of Mahamba's existence is the respect it still commands, because sometimes what science cannot find in survival itself keeps hidden.